Hello and welcome back to Commercial Radio. So currently we're busy with airtime. We started on module 1.3 within the previous lesson. Today we'll be continuing with that. In the previous lecture, we spoke about spots and live reads. So we looked at the difference between the two, and we said that now that we're looking at airtime, airtime is the time on air that the sales team can sell in order to generate revenue for the radio station. So that's airtime. And we said spots are also classified as generic or classic airtime. It's a recorded message that is played during the airtime segment that was brought by the advertiser. They're typically 30 seconds long, which is the benchmark length, but they can range from 5 seconds to 60 seconds. And they are clustered into advertising breaks or ad breaks, and they can be up to 7 ads in such an ad break. Then we said that a 30-second spot must always deliver on the 3 C's, which were capture, curiosity, and convert. Capture meaning the content must capture the attention of the audience. This can be done through a cleverly crafted script, a voiceover, music, and messaging. Content must arouse the curiosity of the listener in order to encourage their continued listening and eventual brand buying. Content must convert the listener from being a passive consumer of the message into an active member of the brand community. A good radio spot must be like a story. We spoke about reach and frequency. Reach being the ability for the advertiser to reach as many listeners as possible. This ensures that their message is widespread. Frequency, on the other hand, refers to how often you would hear an ad, so how often it's scheduled to play. And then we looked at live reads. So a live read is very similar to a spot in that it also contains a brand message. It's also scripted and paid for by the advertiser, and it also attempts to influence a listener's feelings about the brand. The biggest difference is that a live read is exactly that, it's live. It's not recorded, but rather read out by the presenter during a commercial break. So it can be at the beginning or at the end of an ad break, and it gives the perception of a personal endorsement because a presenter is reading it. And this also provides credibility to that brand. This is also why a live read is more expensive than a generic advert, or this is something that salespeople refer to as the loading fee. And with that, we get into today's lesson, which is on page 334 of your textbook. Okay, and today what we're looking at is sponsorships and branded content. What do you understand under sponsorship and branded content? In your mind, what is that? Do you think there's a difference between the two? If there is one, what is the difference between the two? Commercial radio inventory is always expanding, with advertisers fighting for the same share of voice and listeners becoming far more selective with their purchase patterns. Brands are seeking out ways to create impacts with their messaging and ensure that their value proposition is well received. This means looking outside of utilizing only a typical 30-second advert, okay, and incorporating a non-traditional content-based approach that allows for product integration. So what's happening now is we're looking around for alternative ways of advertising that is not only utilizing the 30-second ad. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be exploring 2 of these avenues, and they are then sponsorship and branded content. I just asked you, what do you think the difference is? So the difference between sponsorships and branded content is how much the brand is responsible for the content creation, okay? Sponsorships link brands to content that already exists. We as a team have already come up with the content. It's there. I just need to add a sponsor to it. Branded content, on the other hand, creates content from scratch for a specific campaign with a set duration. And we want it to run for X amount of time. And this is what we see the outcomes to be of this feature. This is what we see the outcome to be of this branded content. And then us as the radio station together with the client will come up with this content. What this means is that sponsorships are usually much more affordable because the content is already being produced. Branded content, on the other hand, requires more people, creative development, and production to be involved in creating and producing the content, as well as delivering it on air then. Radios are in the business of creating content. The nature of this content varies from what is called long-form content, typically written and recorded or spoken, okay, so a little bit longer pieces, to daily and weekly topics and features. Topics and features are usually time-stamped, so listeners can expect certain content to be delivered to them at the same time each day or week. So we've spoken about features already, okay? And what did we say about them? Features reoccur the same time, whether it's daily or weekly. Remember what we said about appointment listening, okay? We know that something is going to be coming up at a specific time. This type of content works well for advertisers because they can align their brand to existing, well-received content that has a guaranteed audience. Okay, I know I'm going to tune in for this feature every week or every day. It also associates the brand with the particular content's theme or position. If we look at an example here, a company that sells sport equipment may want to place their advertising just before or just after the news sports segment of a morning radio show in order to associate their brand with that content and ensure it's front of mind for listeners. Buying into these existing content offerings is known as a sponsorship. So as a brand, I am now sponsoring these content offerings because I bought into it. The way in which sponsorships are delivered varies significantly in terms of the actual content. However, the structure is always fairly similar. Sponsorship can be broken down into two categories, which are mandatory indicators and features. So this is under sponsorships now, okay? So under sponsorships, we're now looking at mandatory indicators. Almost all radio shows deliver news, traffic, sport, weather, and financial indicators. These content pieces play an important role in the radio station's programming and the content of each show. They are the traditional markers that establish appointment listening behavior. Okay, again, appointment listening. Every morning at 7 o'clock on the hour, I know there's going to be news. That's appointment listening. I'm tuning in to the news. The same way I know that if I want to hear news headlines, I can tune in at 7:30 on the dot every day and I'll hear the news headlines. Brands can tap into any or all of these elements for sponsorship. Okay, so a brand can now come in to the content that you had on there. So if I was drinking Bon Aqua water and Volpre decided to come and sponsor my Bon Aqua water bottle, I take a Volpre sticker and I just post it over the Bon Aqua bottle, and now you are associating Volpre with the water in that bottle, even though it's actually Bon Aqua. Okay, so that's what it means. So the brand encloses the content as provided by the radio station for its own messaging. The key for radio sponsorship is to do this in a way that sounds enticing and relevant to the listener. If we look at the airtime structure for a sponsorship, it's generally a 10-second opening billboard, okay, a OBB, at the start, and then a 10-second closing billboard, which is CBB, at the end, followed by a 30-second generic spot or live read. Opening and closing billboards are either read by the presenter before and after the indicator, or they're pre-recorded and played before and after the presenter reads the content. Billboards indicate a brand's affiliation to the sponsored material and alert the listener that the content they are about to hear or have just heard is delivered to them courtesy of whoever that brand is. What is happening now is that there is this association with the brand that is being created that can improve recognition, credibility, and trust for this brand. So if you look on page 335 in your textbook at the bottom there, you'll see there's a small diagram just showing how it will be. So at the beginning, you'll have at the top, there's the opening billboard, the 10-second opening billboard. Right after that is your mandatory indicator. So whether it's sport, news, traffic, weather, finance, etc. Okay, varying lengths depending on what it is. Right after that, you have your closing billboard again for 10 seconds. Right after that, you have your live read or your 30-second generic spot. You would have heard that all over. These mandatory indicators are things that we always try to get sponsored because they're set. We know they are going to happen. If a bank was sponsoring the financial indicators, we would have an OBB, so an opening billboard, that will be read before the actual financial indicators. And it could sound something like, it's time to look at our financial indicators, brought to you by mBank, a financial institution you can trust with your money. And then it'll be the feature, and then a CBB or a closing billboard might say something like, those were your financial indicators brought to you by mBank. As a financial institution you can trust, visit mbank.co.za today to consult with one of our financial advisors about how to grow your money. These reports are offered at a standardized cost based on how they are constructed with the airtime elements, okay? What we would do is you would look at your rate card plus a 10-second opening or closing billboard and a 30-second generic ad. So you would put those costs together. And then if we look at the second type of sponsorship, it is features. So features are a benchmark for engagement in most radio shows. Listeners know what sort of content to expect at a particular time and anticipate this in their listening patterns. It could be that a show includes a joke of the day or a 5-minute quiz at 7:10 in the morning that becomes a hallmark of the show. Features can be accompanied by a jingle or a key introductory piece that signals the start of this content. From an advertiser's perspective, while these are delivered similarly to the news and sport and traffic and financial indicators in the way that they are time-based, informative, and sharing a cost model, features created by the show or the station offer much more interaction between the audience and the brand. Think about it. Do you interact with the news or the sport or the weather? Not really, hey. But think about a feature. If there's a game on air, do you interact with the game? Yes, you do, whether as a passive listener or as an active listener. So there's a lot more interaction between the audience and the brand in a feature. There's often more room for listener suggestions via calls or social media and opportunities for the core audience to actively contribute to what they're listening to. This is invaluable. Why? Because content is being created by the audience at the same time as being created for the audience. If a brand can find a way to be naturally and helpfully involved in a much loved co-created feature, then the audience will naturally be more engaged with the brand on a personal level and not simply with them as an advertiser. As such, features have become key commodities for brands as they are viewed as a direct line of communication with the listener. The brands that do feature sponsorships well make sure that the brand adds value to those features rather than simply adding a name. Okay, so it's about adding a value to the feature. The sponsorship of features must be treated carefully and creatively. There should be an alignment between the content in the feature and the brand sponsoring it. So for example, a cell phone brand with key music features may sponsor music mixes to highlight its affinity to music and encourage the audience to view it as an expert within that field. This association can benefit the company when the listener is looking to buy a new cell phone by placing that brand at the front of the listener's mind with an existing positive association with that music feature. When there is natural alignment, the commercial message seems less blatant, meaning that listeners may be more open to it. So it sounds less like an actual ad that's being played because it flows better. When considering the sponsorship of a feature, brands have to plan and commit to a long-term view. Sponsoring a feature for a day or even a week does little to create an impact. When considering the high volume of advertising messages that a typical consumer is exposed to, it takes time and consistency to build an association with the brand. Think about yourself. How often do you hear something to start building a connection with the brand? This could range from as little as 6 weeks to a full year, okay? In doing so, the station is protected from being perceived as fickle and disloyal to sponsors, and it ensures that sponsors will commit to a set period of time. It also assists the brand in embedding itself in the audience's mind and building on that association over time. Sponsorships can be multidimensional. Specific feature if you've missed the show live. Depending on the feature, it is possible to extend it to an off-air event which listeners can attend to experience the content in person. This integration of different media elements can be used together to enhance the overall impact of the campaign for the advertisers and the listeners. So more of a 360 approach. A station that's just top of mind for me right now, because I've used them as an example for features, is 947. If you go onto their website, they have one specific page that's specifically dedicated to their features. So you can go and click on a feature and you can go and listen to features that have taken place, which they have put on as podcasts. Okay, so all of these now were part of your sponsorships. So your sponsorships had 2 sections, which was firstly your mandatory indicators, secondly your features. Mandatory indicators being things like your news, traffic, sport, weather, and financial indicators. And then your features are those pieces that occur on a weekly basis or a daily basis that are the benchmark for engagements on most radio shows. And now we move on to branded content. Where previously brands relied on a radio station's existing content structures, the system has evolved and brands are now looking to co-create content so that they are more involved in shaping the narrative, okay? They want to be involved in that storytelling. This content is bespoke, so it's new, it's original, and it's usually created by the radio station in partnership with the client and their creative or media agencies in order to deliver their marketing messages most effectively and sustain listeners. Simply put, branded content allows a brand to create stories that are compelling and intertwine with the message. Brands will often look to place this type of content on their media partners' platforms, so in this case on the radio station's platform, due to the wide span of their reach and the specific audience that they're trying to target. Branded content is an ever-evolving sphere of media, and there are many trends ensuring the best practice. It's important to consider the following when generating a branded content campaign. Firstly, start with a clear brief. The brief should detail a singular objective that needs to be fulfilled by the content. Content should be diverse and engaging for listeners in order to achieve a good marketing strategy. Secondly, think about how to deliver the narrative. When you've identified what you want the audience to know, this will help shape how you make them aware of it, okay? It could be through a series of short podcasts or a visual web series that depicts the brand in a particular manner. The brand in the correct context in order to create the desired association. If a brand is a financial institution focused on helping people to save money, then instead of simply stating what they do, offer practical tips and hints for listeners to save money, sponsored by the brand. Document stories of people whom this institution has assisted and show how it has enabled people positively. This gives the brand a personal face and a voice rather than issuing anonymous messages to an audience that is already overwhelmed with advertising. And then develop a storyboard and a campaign timeline. Develop content to fill the entire period that the brand has paid for. If the client is interested in a 4-week campaign, consider how long each piece of content needs to be in order to convey a different message every week. Think about when this content will be released and the audience's potential openness to it at that time. Carefully match the time and the day and the audience's expected behavior with the message so that listeners will be in the right space to receive and act on this message. Then point number 5 there, set targets. Monitor your targets in terms of engagement and brand recall. Branded content requires agility, which means you may need to adapt and change the content as it's being made to ensure success. Targets must be reported on at the end of the campaign in a post-campaign analysis. Any media agency or brand or advertiser who advertises with your station is going to ask you for a post-campaign analysis at the end of your campaign or at the end of their campaign with you. Success is not just the completion of the campaign, but rather whether you have met the targets you set out with the client prior to the campaign beginning. Okay, so it's all about the targets. Have the targets been met? And then lastly, they make the content shareable. Branded content should be compelling enough that listeners want to talk about it after they've heard it. The more an audio or a digital piece is shared, the more people will hear and see it, increasing chances of the brand to influence behavior and to drive conversions according to the targets that they have set. Okay, so let's look at example 9A on pages 338 up until 342 to see how branded content is developed between the sales team and the programming team at a radio station. So example 9A reads, costing a sponsorship and creating branded content. Sponsorship costing will include the following components. So firstly, the parties involved, which will be in this case the client, the media practitioner managing the sponsorship for the client, the sales representative managing the sponsorship for the radio station, and the show and the presenters executing the campaign on air. So there are a few people involved, okay? And this is normal. This is absolutely normal for sponsorship and for branded content on air. In fact, from a client's point of view, there might even be a few other people also involved. And then some of the other components to look at is the timeline and the on-air dates, the relevant radio station and the sponsorship, the relevant radio station where the sponsorship is being booked. And what they've done is they've shown you an average rate card, which might be something that you would get from the media practitioner who would be booking the spots on, who will be booking the slots on your radio station, or it might be that your sales representative worked it out. Okay, so it just gives you the time channels and the days and the costs and if there's a discount and what the total cost is. This is quite an average example of how the costings would look for a 30-second mention during different channels and on different days. Then if you turn the page on page 340, we look at a branded content set, a branded content piece. The costing for branded content is calculated based on all the components that are included in the campaign for the brand. So this can vary significantly. In order to start creating this brand content, most radio stations will make use of a creative briefing form on which they capture all the information needed to develop the idea. And this includes all the parties that are involved in approving and implementing the idea at the radio station. So if we look at this example, the station is ESFM, client is telco, the name of the person who received the brief is on here, as well as the creative strategist, okay? They tell you who their media agency is, who's handling the planning, who's the buyer. So you wouldn't always have all of these details, just by the way. Again, it depends on just how it's seen. But if it comes from a media agency, there will always be a planner and a buyer involved. And depending on what it is, like in this case, if it's branded content or a sponsorship, there would be a creative agency also involved. And then what's the budget? So how much money can they spend on your station for this whole campaign? What is the timing? So how long? The deadline? Who are they targeting? Very important. Then some info on the client. What is the unique selling point? Really important. All these points are super important from a sales point of view. So what is the client's unique selling point? You need to have a unique selling point. What sets them apart from their competitors? Who are their key competitors? Okay, and then we look at how do they behave in the brand marketing? What is the brand's tone of voice? So here you can see it's upbeat, positive, youthful, and fun. And then if you look at page 341, campaign objective. What are the specific business objectives? Again, super important for you to know when you're starting with this creative brief. So there you'll see they have their objective. So this is their 40th birthday, and they want to do a whole week-long promotion around their birthday. Their campaign objective is to drive app downloads and then to generate excitement around telco as a celebrated South African brand. And then they give you a bit more info about the promotion and the type of prizes that can be won. And then if you turn to the last page, page 342, what is the key challenge? So what is the key message of the campaign? What must we land with the audience? What action are we trying to inspire? And then they have their bit there. What does success look like to the client? So what does the client want to get out of this at the end of the day? So they want to increase their app downloads and app usage through the campaign, as well as increase data purchasing. So they have a few objectives here. How will the campaign be measured? It'll be measured by the number of app downloads, number of app interactions through a promo code, and rand value of the data purchased in the campaign period. So this all is an example of a creative briefing form. And again, this is average. This is something that you see a lot. Me that came from a media agency background, this is something that you work with pretty much. This is something, you have something similar to this with every single campaign you put on air. Any creative thing. So unless it's purely a 30-second recorded or a 30-second live that you're putting on air, if you're putting anything creative on air, like branded content or sponsorships, you will have to fill in something like this so that you have a clear understanding about what it is that the campaign should do and what it is that the client wants, but also how the radio station and the brand can work together. Okay. So that's where we'll be stopping this lecture on airtime. Okay. So within this lesson, we look specifically at sponsorship and branded content. Sponsorship was broken down into your mandatory indicators and your features that can be sponsored. These we said are more cost effective than branded content because the content already exists. You as a client can just simply latch onto it. You normally have to commit to a time period, okay? Anything from 6 months to a year. Whereas branded content is content that is being co-created. Branded content is content that will be created by the radio station in partnership with the client and their creative or media agencies. And why do they do this? So that they can deliver the marketing message more effectively and sustain listenership. Okay, and that brings me to the end of this lecture. So I will see you again for our next one, where we will be continuing with airtime. And with that, I say goodbye for now.